Good to have you with us. It's always a pleasure talking to you, especially when it comes to complicated matters. So when we discuss this, I'm going to ask you to speak Gareth, so I can understand exactly how this works. So I understand that this new code of good practice is aimed at eliminating violent and damaging strike action. How?
Well, firstly, we've seen that the recent strike at Sibanye-Stillwater that started in November already, it's now into its 9th week, and it's still carrying on unabated. There we had 3 deaths already, and we did have violence, particularly because of inter-union rivalry. You have National Union of Mine Workers, you have AMCU, you have that type of rivalry, and we've seen that type of violence also in the Marikana strike. We all recall what happened in 2012, 2014. It was the most violent strikes. And then the parties to NEDLAC came together 2017 and 2018, and they thrashed out a new accord, dealing with collective bargaining, to deal with good faith bargaining as well. Parties come to the table prepared that there are going to be new measures to assist in facilitating disputes quicker so that you can get to the agreement. Now, the problem is a number of trade unions signed that. The CUSATU trade unions, the government signed it. But, for instance, AMCU and NUMSA, the new trade union federation, did not sign it. So you don't have all the parties there. So what the government then did is it took that accord, made it into a code of good practice, dealing with collective bargaining, strikes and picketing, and now from the 1st of January, it's a code that is to be read with the Labour Relations Act, which our courts can use to interpret, the Labour Relations Act.
I imagine, though, there is a problem, especially when you don't have all the unions, mentioning that inter-union rivalry, that not all the unions are on board with this. So this sounds good on paper, but in practice, I imagine this is not going to work.
Well, we're going to have a test now. We obviously have this ongoing strike, that AMCU has at the gold mines, but they're also busy with negotiations in the platinum industry again. It's going to start soon. So when that strike is possibly called, also by AMCU, I would suppose, then you're going to have the new code apply, and we hope that that's going to, in fact, assist. Now, there are a number of measures, relating to that. You said, explain what the code brings. The code brings to us a balloting requirement, so each union must have in their constitution a balloting requirement that they have to test their members first, whether they want to go on a strike. Because we never know, are they being intimidated? Why are they actually embarking on the strike? And we see that in the mining industry, it happens quite often. And so the only problem with that is the unions was not prepared to go as far as allowing employers then to interdict the strike because they didn't ballot, because they feel that is in fact undermining their right to strike. So it's a bit of a watered down version that's in the code. And then secondly, the more important one is in relation to picketing, because with picketing you also have a lot of violence and you have intimidation. So there the parties are required before the union calls, when the union calls a strike, before the strike starts, a picketing agreement has to be in place. If not, you can stop the strike.
And I imagine then this code is also going to provide more clarity, as we've often spoken to the police on this particular channel and private security services, public security purposes. They're not sure how to handle strike action or picket action. I'm hoping that you're going to tell me this is going to provide some clarity for SAPS.
The code does provide some more clarity for SAPS. It requires them to, in fact, cooperate with an employer before a strike starts and there's a potential for violence. And it then clarifies the role and the limits on the powers of private security firms, because that's also problematic in a number of these cases. Possibly also because it becomes problematic. The police can't be everywhere. So the mine then has to utilize its own security force to, in fact, try and limit that intimidation and violence.
The problem we have whenever speaking to the unions, when there's a strike action on the go, whether it's the platinum sector, the gold sector, or anything to do with mining at all, is the unions, and I'm sure you've seen these interviews, will say that they are there to picket peacefully. They are there to strike peacefully. It is external elements, it is third element forces that are coming in to cause the chaos. How is that being addressed? Because then it gets very difficult to ascertain, as you say, who is legit and who is not.
Well, unfortunately, the reason why they are striking is because they want higher wages and better conditions of employment. So it affects those members of a trade union directly. Now, what possibly happens, and it does happen, is that there's a bit of obfuscation. You know, the guys who are staking the violence are not the members, but it's people who are sympathizing with the cause, and for that reason the unions must be kept responsible, and for that reason the picketing must also be responsibility of a union, and that's where this code brings more clarity.
Have you gotten a sense so far, Johan, as we begin to wrap this up, that the unions generally are on board with the idea? They want peaceful picketing because they don't want violence. It looks bad for PR. It looks bad for their members, and obviously they're never going to get what they want. Are you getting a sense, despite perhaps the UMCOs of the world who aren't happy with one or two clauses, are generally happy with some better guidelining?
I think the CUSATU trade unions definitely are on board. They are supporting this code, and they're supporting what's in the accord that was also reached at NETLAC. But, you know, we need to work. We need to bring in UMCO. We need to bring in, you know, Mr. Vavi's trade federation. We've got to, in fact, convince them as well that it is in everyone's best interest that we curb violence, that we have control, that we have good faith bargaining, and that we have compliance with this new code.
Just very briefly, why aren't they on board? Have you spoken to them? Are they aware of this? What are their concerns in a nutshell?
I think there's a lot of distrust. You know, you have to look also at the history of certain other people involved. Mr. Mantashe was the General Secretary when Mr. Machunja, the current leader of UMCO, was ousted. So there's a lot of distrust there, and in fact they don't trust government. They want to, in fact, do their own thing.
All right, Johan, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much, India, for coming to speak to us this evening. Johan Olivier from Webber Wentzel Attorneys, all new measures to bring order to strikes, hopefully more peaceful. But as you've heard, not everybody's on board. But we'll, of course, get reaction to the various unions and stakeholders in bringing more peaceful order to strike action.